In a historic decision, the Supreme Court has struck down President Trump's sweeping global tariffs, ending a controversial era of protectionist trade policy. The administration's tariffs, imposed under a broad reading of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, marked a sharp break from decades of free trade orthodoxy. Critics argued the tariffs hurt American businesses and consumers, while supporters claimed they protected U.S. jobs and industries. The court's ruling decisively limits presidential authority to unilaterally impose tariffs, reasserting Congress's constitutional role in trade. This verdict closes a turbulent chapter in American economic policy and opens a new, uncertain era for U.S. trade. The legal battle began in boardrooms across America, where anxious executives and legal teams pored over the implications of sweeping new tariffs. As the economic impact rippled through industries, companies scrambled to assess their options, weighing the risks of compliance against the potential for costly litigation. The stakes were high, and uncertainty loomed over every decision. Soon, the fight moved from corporate offices to the nation's courtrooms, as companies hit by tariffs challenged the administration's use of IEEPA in court. Legal teams argued that the president's actions stretched the law beyond its intended limits, setting a dangerous precedent for future executive overreach. Lower courts repeatedly ruled against the White House, finding the president had overstepped his authority by using national security as a pretext for broad trade actions. Judges scrutinized the administration's justifications, questioning whether the threat cited truly warranted such sweeping measures. The Court of International Trade and the Federal Circuit both declared the tariffs unconstitutional, but delayed enforcement to allow for Supreme Court review. Their decisions sent shockwaves through Washington, signaling a rare judicial rebuke of executive power in matters of trade and national security. The administration, undeterred, argued these rulings threatened the president's power to protect national interests. Officials warned that limiting executive authority could hamper the government's ability to respond swiftly to global threats and economic challenges. Recognizing the stakes, the Supreme Court agreed to hear the case, setting the stage for a defining showdown over executive power. Legal scholars, politicians, and business leaders alike watched closely, aware that the court's decision could reshape the boundaries of presidential authority for generations. The case became a referendum on the limits of presidential authority in trade and national security, raising fundamental questions about the separation of powers and the role of the judiciary in checking the executive branch. The outcome would shape the balance of power between Congress and the White House for years to come, influencing not only trade policy, but the very fabric of American governance. Before the Supreme Court, the administration insisted the president needed broad authority to respond to global economic threats. They argued IEEPA gave the executive branch flexibility to act swiftly in emergencies, and that courts should defer to presidential judgment on national security. Opponents countered that the Constitution gives Congress, not the president, the power to regulate foreign commerce and impose tariffs. They warned that allowing such sweeping executive action would undermine the separation of powers and turn the president into an economic monarch. The challengers argued that persistent trade imbalances do not constitute a true emergency under IEEPA. The court was asked to decide whether the president could bypass Congress to reshape the nation's trade policy. In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court struck down the tariffs, ruling the president had exceeded his authority under IEEPA. Chief Justice Roberts, writing for the majority, emphasized that the power to tax and regulate trade belongs to Congress, not the executive. The opinion warned that unchecked presidential power would erase constitutional boundaries and set a dangerous precedent. Notably, Justices Barrett and Kavanaugh joined the majority, prioritizing constitutional structure over partisan loyalty. The dissent, led by Justice Gorsuch, argued the court should defer to the president's judgment in economic emergencies. The ruling reaffirms the judiciary's role in checking executive overreach and upholding the separation of powers. The ruling's immediate impact is massive. Overnight, the government faces the prospect of refunding up to $150 billion in tariffs collected from American businesses. This unprecedented move sends shockwaves through the financial sector, as companies and policymakers scramble to assess the full implications. For many, it's a windfall that could reshape balance sheets and business strategies for years to come. For companies reliant on imports, This is more than just a refund. It's a crucial financial lifeline. Lower costs on imported goods could allow businesses to expand operations, hire more workers, and invest in new technologies. Consumers may also benefit as companies pass on savings through lower prices, helping to stabilize inflation and boost purchasing power across the country. The decision effectively removes a major tax burden, offering long-awaited relief to both industries and everyday consumers. Manufacturers can now plan with greater certainty, while retailers anticipate steadier supply chains and more predictable costs. This newfound stability could encourage economic growth and innovation in sectors previously hampered by high tariffs. However, the loss of tariff revenue creates a huge budget shortfall, forcing Congress to confront tough fiscal choices. Lawmakers must now debate whether to cut spending, raise other taxes, or find alternative sources of revenue to fill the gap. The political debate is likely to intensify, with competing visions for how to maintain government services without the billions once generated by tariffs. The administration's strategy of using tariffs to fund government operations is now invalidated, upending years of fiscal planning. Officials are under pressure to quickly devise new approaches to keep essential programs running and avoid disruptions to public services. Internationally, the U.S. loses a key bargaining chip in trade negotiations, shifting leverage back to traditional diplomacy. Without the threat of new tariffs, American negotiators must rely on alliances, dialogue, and compromise to advance national interests on the global stage. The end of the tariff era could mean a more predictable, less confrontational trade policy. Businesses and trading partners may welcome the return to stability, fostering stronger international relationships and encouraging long-term investment in global supply chains. But it also leaves some domestic industries, like steel, worried about renewed foreign competition. Without tariff protections, these sectors may face difficult adjustments, prompting calls for new forms of government support or innovation to stay competitive in a rapidly changing marketplace. Reaction to the decision split sharply along political lines, with both sides quick to voice their perspectives. The ruling sent shockwaves through Washington, igniting passionate responses from politicians, business leaders, and everyday Americans alike. As the news broke, the country braced for a new round of heated debate. President Trump condemned the ruling as judicial overreach, calling it a setback for his administration's efforts to protect American industries. He vowed to continue his America First agenda by other means, promising supporters that he would fight for American jobs and sovereignty, regardless of the obstacles. Trump's allies echoed his frustration, warning that the decision could undermine the nation's economic security. Democratic leaders, on the other hand, praised the court for defending the Constitution and protecting consumers from what they called reckless trade wars. They argued that the decision restored checks and balances and would help shield American families from unnecessary price hikes. Many Democrats celebrated the ruling as a victory for the rule of law and for ordinary citizens. The business community, especially importers and retailers, celebrated the end of costly tariffs and the return of supply chain stability. For many companies, the ruling meant relief from months of uncertainty and the hope of lower costs. Retailers anticipated that consumers would soon see price drops on everyday goods, while logistics firms welcomed the smoother flow of goods at ports and warehouses. Some manufacturers, however, fear losing protection from foreign competition. They worry that without tariffs, American factories could struggle to compete with cheaper imports, putting jobs and entire industries at risk. Labor unions voiced concern that the decision could lead to layoffs and plant closures in vulnerable sectors. Among the public, opinions are divided. Some see the ruling as a blow to American workers, others as relief from rising prices. In communities across the country, people debated whether the decision would help or hurt their families. For some, the promise of lower costs at the store was welcome news. For others, the fear of job losses overshadowed any potential benefits. The decision has reignited debates over the proper balance of power in Washington, with lawmakers and citizens alike questioning the roles of the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. Protests and rallies erupted outside the Capitol and the Supreme Court, reflecting the intensity of the national conversation. It's a moment that will shape political and economic discourse for years to come, as Americans grapple with the consequences of the ruling and what it means for the future of the country. The story is far from over. and its impact will continue to unfold in the months and years ahead. This case is part of a broader struggle over the limits of presidential authority. The ruling signals that the Supreme Court is willing to check executive power, especially where Congress's constitutional prerogatives are at stake. Other major cases this term challenge the president's power to fire independent agency officials and to alter birthright citizenship by executive order. The tariff decision may foreshadow a judicial trend toward reinforcing statutory and constitutional boundaries. Public trust in the court remains polarized, but this cross-ideological majority may help restore faith in its independence. The decision underscores the court's role as a guardian of the separation of powers. It's a defining moment in the ongoing debate over the reach of the modern presidency. The Supreme Court's decision forces a fundamental shift in U.S. trade policy. The administration must now work with Congress or use narrower laws to address trade disputes, ending the era of unilateral emergency tariffs. This could lead to a more stable, bipartisan approach to trade, with Congress reclaiming its constitutional role. The ruling also reasserts the judiciary's power to resolve high-stakes conflicts between the branches of government. As the U.S. navigates a complex global economy, the end of the tariff era presents both challenges and opportunities. The nation faces a new chapter, one that demands negotiation, compromise, and respect for constitutional limits. The future of American trade will be shaped not by executive fiat but by the enduring framework of the Constitution.